mean, so in a way, because civil society shaped those spaces, I think those are kind of advantages for civil society to use very well in order to ensure that we bring all the key actors into the room, bring them together and work together to get our goals achieved. Thank you.
I needed an insight more, and I don't know who's going to give this between Dr. Wakabi or Patricia. And I'm asking this because you have now, in the last couple of weeks, worked with both the SADC region in developing capacity for the East African uh, community, and also developing capacity for the SADC, which is Southern African community, and also have done this with a few government. And the reason is because I want this insight because you are, as a CSO, it's good that other people learn how you're able to build this capacity. Feel free not to talk about the money, focus on the capacity and how you're able to build the trust in this, because then it's very hard the scenario that you see a CSO trying to train the governments of these countries on how to run their data and have them listen. But then in the last two recs, we've had nothing but good feedback, and also in the government. So it's good to hear that insight from the source so that we have an understanding.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I am Patricia from CIPESA. Indeed, we are doing this work in Lesotho, Maseru, and the government, I would like to say, they are very receptive. I know Dr. Wakabi is there and he would agree because we're in the field together. We've had sessions with them on these kinds of things, as well as the East African Court of Justice, training judges on these issues. And it comes to a point where there is need. So it's an invitation through your team, and CIPESA is always willing to, and very happy to comply. Thank you.
I was more keen to figure out how you've been able to build trust in this, because then for us is that there are scenarios where you see CSOs being able to lead government conversations and in the process build the trust with this government, that we don't have issues of, oh, we're not comfortable with this has been said, we're not comfortable this has been done. But then you've done this in East Africa as a community, and now you've done this in SADC as a community also. And I think it's quite good, because then this is something that is rarely done. And we felt that this is something that people can learn how to build trust, because it took the trust for you to be able to do that. And also the trust that even though Dr. Wakabi is manhunted, he still did that.
Thank you, Joshua. So, as my colleague said, we have done trainings for the East African Court of Justice and for East African Legislative Assembly. And last week, was it last week or this week? This week we had a training in Madagascar for data commissioners, for telecom regulators, and Minister of ICTs, in trying to come up with a harmonized data governance strategy. I think the key is for us to really show why it matters for government entities to have laws and policies that are strongly protective of data rights, but also that promote innovation. A lot of the time, I think when we have conversations, we seem to dwell on the need for data protection laws to protect privacy, okay, and other rights, to guard against surveillance, etc. That's very important, and as civil society, let's keep doing that. But we need to speak a bit more in terms of how do these policies enable trade, enable movement of people, enable integration. For policymakers and other regulators, that matters a lot. And when they are able to understand the benefits of a model that is both enabling of free flow of data, but also protects rights, then I think the conversation becomes easier for you to have with those entities. But final point, I think at where we stand today, we are lucky that we have the African Union data protection policy framework, because it gives really important guidance in terms of how countries can go about their policies, but also how they can cooperate better and harmonize their policies, and the importance of that. If we are able to articulate that and show the benefits and address the concerns which countries have, and they do have them, then I think we are able to have the conversation move forward and offer advice to government entities. Thank you.
There was something good that's the reason why I called you to speak about it is, so usually when policies are being developed, the government tried to spearhead this, and from our side as development partners, we try to do the usual way of getting consultants who do this job directly with the government, right? But in this case, we have been with the African Union experimenting to use CSOs and also private sectors to see how they can spearhead the process of the policy development with the government. And we try to put it in the back of their mind that we are doing this because we want a leveling ground at which the CSOs and the private sectors and also the academia, the researchers can all sit down in the same room with the government who owns this process to discuss about it. And hence why, in the case of what Wakabi was trying to say, is that we also tell the CSOs that we are capacitating you to do this, not because we want you to go and have very nice, good argument with the government, but rather make them see reasons to why they should be able to do these policies in the way that they are human-centric, and also in the way that, you know, will build trust between both the citizens and also the government. And he had explained he's doing this in a few countries and also now in the Rex. But maybe the next question will be to Abby from Flutterwave. And I was more keen to figure out how, as the private sector, because then something we've noticed is even when we work on these policies, we have very nice policies that safeguard our data as much as we can. We also see the scenario where the private sector, who are now the ones who are meant to do the job that they're meant to do, have issues to then work on compliance. Because then the policies might be very sweet, it safeguards the human nature of man. Data are not being moving, data are being secured. You can't, in the GDPR case, you can't even ask for sensitive data except it's very, very important. You know, we have those data policies in the countries. I'm more keen to figure out how, as private sector, you're able to circumvent this, and also, more importantly, still be innovative, because then, for us, is that the finance scape in the continent has been one of the farthest developed space, and we wanted to see that, regardless of all these policies that have been thrown in the countries, how is it a company like Flutterwave, amongst the others, are still able to innovate, and pretty much is a good space for you to give your 1 or 2 cents.
Yeah, I think he works over here. He does. Okay. Thank you, Joshua. I think one of the most challenging things that I've found in this space is trying to balance compliance and innovation. Because a lot of times, most privacy laws they're sort of designed not factoring sector-specific peculiarities. Right, and I'll give an example. So think about, I think it was yesterday I said something about anti-money laundering and KYC. So a financial company or even a bank needs to onboard a customer, and when you want to onboard that customer, you need to know the customer and run checks on their IDs. And this is a classic example, and I'm sure it extends even beyond the financial industry. The central banks mandates that you conduct these checks. You don't find a partner, for instance, within the location you are in to run those checks on the customer. Now, this would mean, first of all, that you have to engage a foreign partner to do this. There are some laws today in some markets that we operate in that mandate you to obtain consent from the customer for processing. So you want to onboard a customer, you must get their consent before you even do anything with that customer. And I'm thinking to myself, how am I supposed to do this when a central bank guideline or an anti-money laundering law on the one hand is saying you need to conduct KYC, you need to run sanctions checks to be sure that this person is not a politically exposed person, or this person had not bombed Iraq sometime in the past, and also get consent from that person. Because by the basic construct of consent, it has to be informed, right? So you need to take out an affirmative action, and you also have to be able to opt out from whatever you're consenting to. So if I decide to use consent as a basis in that activity, what happens where the customer says, okay, no, I don't want you to run KYC checks on me? So this is a challenge that I have with the law in that particular market mandating consent for everything. So again, not factoring in sector-specific peculiarities. Now that may apply in maybe a hospital, it may apply to a telco, but it may not necessarily apply to a bank. It may not necessarily apply to a school. So I think that's the first challenge that I find with implementation and trying to strike a balance. But from the private sector angle, I think what is important, first of all, is that organizations need to even understand the regulatory terrain. So if you want to start to operate, whether you're a startup, whether you're mid-sized, you're a big organization, you need to even understand what the law is saying in terms of the kind of operations that you do. So, and even beyond, privacy laws, you also have to strike a balance between laws that guide your sector and the privacy law itself. So when you do understand that, it's always about, first of all, highlighting what applies, what does not apply, what can I comply with and what can I not comply with. Some are easy to apply, right? So put up a privacy notice because you have to be transparent. You have to let the customer know what you're doing with their information. Even though I have some concerns with how some organizations do this today, because you can have a privacy notice that is like, 32 pages? I think Bernard was saying something like that this morning. That is 32 pages, and you're wondering why it is that lengthy. But sometimes I don't blame them as well, because the law says, tell the customer literally everything. And in doing that, you're going to have a lengthy document. So that's why I usually advise organizations to put your notices in sections so that people can easily know that if you have a sidebar, for instance, it says, what information are you collecting from me? What are you doing with that information? It's easy for people to know, or take a layered approach to, being transparent about this. But that transparency is very important, and it also ties back into trust, which I'll not dwell too much into right now. So internally, from the organizational perspective, once these laws have been identified, you can document them, maybe in your compliance rulebook or some sort of document that you want to have internally so that you can monitor these things. Where you then have the regulations or laws, sections that you find a bit difficult to comply with, I absolutely love regulator engagements, right? Because again, I work in a very sensitive space. So the moment I find that something is getting a bit difficult to comply with, we engage the regulator immediately. Now, sometimes you don't necessarily get the feedback that you want, but at least you know that you have some level of hand-holding in your implementation and there's some sort of guidance. So I think that regulator engagement is extremely important as you are checking the laws that apply to you. Another thing from a private sector perspective, and even generally actually, is privacy by design. So you find that a lot of organizations think about compliance after the fact. So the moment you're about to build your product, you're thinking about this, and this applies across board, whether you're a startup, whether you're even the government. There was a day I was traveling through a particular country, and then I saw this automated machine at immigration, and I was just thinking to myself that, first of all, I did not see any notice on anything anywhere, right? And if this applied to a private company, the regulator will be vexed because they expect that you have to put up a notice at every data collection point. So I was just thinking to myself that my data is being collected here, but I don't see anything. I don't see any notice. I mean, who regulates the government? But again, that's a separate conversation. So privacy by design is very important. From the moment you are conceiving that thought of a product, you have to start factoring in all of these laws, and that's where your privacy impact assessments, data protection impact assessments come in, because you want to build the product with the customer in mind, and that's how you can also enable trust. So as you're writing those codes, as your design team is designing the front end, you are already factoring minimization. So you're not collecting too much information than you should collect from the customer, because why will a telco ask you for your genotype, for instance? Or why will a bank ask you for your shoe size and things like that? So you're factoring in minimization to ensure that that company is only collecting information that they need. You're factoring in consent, if you're using it as a basis. Where should your tick box be? If I'm going to send marketing emails to this customer, am I giving them the option to opt in and to opt out? You're already doing that from your product development stage. You don't wait till you roll out the product and then a customer now complains to you about something, then you start trying to fix. That's what a number of organizations do, and it is very bad practice. So it's important to factor in privacy by design. And as you're doing that on the front end, on the back end, you're also making sure that as the information is being collected, you have your security controls being put in place. The data is only limited to people that really need to have access to it and things like that. So privacy by design is extremely important. And I think that's one of the ways you can actually balance innovation, so that even if you think about something that's a product that might be non-compliant, you have already thought about the risks from the get-go. You have engaged your regulator when you need to, and internally as well, you are collaborating. I also think that in balancing innovation, it's important to conduct training for your employees. Internal collaboration is very important. So if you work in an organization that is very fast-paced, sometimes it's very difficult, because the product guys, and I don't know how many people have to deal with, the product guys, the engineers, they are thinking like this with the speed of light. And then you have maybe your compliance, your regulatory, legal on another side, moving a bit slowly because they are factoring innovation. So you have to also, as you're having those external engagements with the regulator, it's important that internally you are having those internal conversations, so that you're pulling in your legal team. They're giving you the advice from, again, product development stage. Your marketing guys are also being guided on not just pushing marketing emails to everybody. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of organizations also get fined. Your product guys, or your engineers as well, are designing the products, to be fit for purpose and compliant as well. So I think that internal collaboration is extremely important, just as you are also doing the external engagements. But these are all the things you can do to sort of balance that innovation and compliance. Sometimes it's very difficult, I tell you, it's very, very difficult, especially in this part of the world, or within Africa, because I also find a lot of knowledge gap, right? So I'll give you another example, again on consent, and what I was saying about obtaining consent of the regulator if you have to maybe transfer data or engage a provider. So there was a particular market where we had this concern, and the law in that market, it's an East African market, the law says that if you have to transfer data for whatever purpose, whether from one entity to the other or outside the region, you have to obtain consent. And first of all, I'm thinking, how do we want to do this for like 5,000, 10,000 customers? And it's not even consent that maybe they tick a box, so you have to give them a form to sign it. And I'm thinking to myself, how do I want to even, how do organizations implement this when you have thousands of customers and you have to send them this form? Each person has to sign it. And in signing it, you're not putting all the providers that you may transfer data to in one document. You're actually going to separate it. So if I have 5 providers, I'm going to use 5 forms per customer. So the customer will see that information. That's how exactly is that attainable? It's not realistic. So we engaged the regulator, and they're like, okay, so what you can just do is to put some sort of notice out when they're signing up, and then have all of them tick one box. And I'm like, okay, if we have all of them tick one box and they decide to opt out, what are they opting out from? Again, that knowledge gap. So these are, I know we're getting there, but I think that capacity building, again, is very important. It just makes compliance a bit difficult. And sometimes it leaves you improvising as an organization because, and it also stifles innovation because you want to roll out something, but it's a bit difficult. I'll give another example. Sorry, I hope I'm not spending so much time. I'll give another example. So there is, again, another market today where you have to get the regulator's approval if you want to engage a provider that is not within your market. That's not a, I mean, I have my concerns with it, but again, it's not a problem. An application has been put into that regulator. Until now, no approval has been gotten. So are you not holding back my business? I cannot move forward with the provider. I cannot move forward with my services because what? I need to be compliant. So these are just, there are major concerns and as I say, balancing innovation and compliance is one of the biggest challenges that I have seen, and I'm sure it impacts a lot of organizations as well. So I think I'll just stop here.
I think what captivated me is the fact that, which I think is a learning point for everyone, is that for some reason the private sector seems to always come back to the government to have dialogues, because then they can't move if they don't satisfy the law, and they also know the implications about it. And I'll go to anyone in the room can answer this, because this also is a bit tilted towards the CSOs. My question then will be is that how can we as CSOs be able to make sure that regardless of all this, we're still able to help the government safeguard the data of citizens, we're still building this trust with this government. And it's very interesting, because then we have seen scenarios of the fact where some interesting countries have had the data of their citizens online, and the result of it is either the CSOs coming to speak about it, or in result of it we have the people laying curses on the government on, oh, you've sent this data, and in the process of doing it they have to show evidence, so they also still help spread the information also. In that way, not even helping in the process of safeguarding this information. So my question will be, how can we as CSOs kind of help the government to safeguard the data of citizens, whereas still building the trust with this government, trust also with the citizens that we also are part of? Anyone can pick up this if you have a good. Yes, you can.
So, I mean, how can CSOs help to guarantee citizens' rights? I think the first thing is CSOs can actually help by empowering the citizens themselves, on their rights. And I think I can give an example in the case of Nigeria, where I am from. When the issue of NIN and government wanted to start collecting personalized data of citizens came about, I think, in 2012. One of the things that CSOs did was actually they took government to court that you don't have access to this right, and that one of the conditions that they would like to see, they advocated for is the government has actually been slowing the passage of data protection laws then. So what government did essentially was actually to pass the first act on data protection, I think around 2011 or 2012. So without that CSOs coming forward to really challenge government's rights to really collect that data, we will not have that act. And that act in itself has really helped to support a lot of things. I mean, because of that act, we have to have the regulators. Because of the regulators, we actually have to now separate the role of Ministry of Information from NITDA, and now we now created a commission, the Nigerian Data Bureau, and that has really helped to strengthen the ecosystem. And I think the work of CSOs in challenging government by class action. They've also really empowered citizens themselves. I mean, we've seen the situation whereby a lot of CSOs, they've really run campaigns around digital rights, such that, there's a lot of CSOs that are actually doing that. In fact, I think sometimes governments and industries really sees these CSOs maybe sometimes as enemies, because they are always advocating and always trying to fight for the right of the citizens. I think we saw that in also Kenya when the digital identity issue came up, and CSO actually went as far as to the Supreme Court to really ask government that there's a limit to which government can do. So we could see that civil society can really stand their ground, fights based on key principle that there's a digital right, which is also a human right, and that right cannot be violated by government. So that's one way I think civil society can help. But I think we've also talked about capacity building, because most times when we look at in many of our countries, we have this digital right, we have human right, but we really think government has these very big institutions that has this huge capacity. Most times the laws are actually most times understood by maybe the drafters of the law and a few people within the, and sometimes those people might be consultants that have passed on, or they are also part of the civil society. So in a way, civil society can actually very well help with capacity building for government itself. And we've seen this. For example, I think when Nigeria established its data regulation act, I know about 3 or 4 institutions in Africa that are based on digital rights. They were the ones that actually came together to really train government in terms of, these are the best practices here, this is what you should do here, and this is how we should go about this. And some of the limitations and challenges that would be faced, they were able to really support government very well. So capacity building, we can actually remove it as one of the core role of civil society. But I think for me, and as a researcher, one of the most important things like civil society to do is research, and also evidence, and also data that really shows what is going on in the public space and domain. Most times when civil society comes in to really debate and engage government, if you come very emotionally without any evidence, sometimes governments have already developed a kind of approach to really mitigate that. But when we come with evidence showing clearly, not just that this is the violation that will arise, this is the sometimes economic costs of we not doing the right thing. These are, for example, when you talked about cross-border data flow, you could actually really encourage government that, okay, this is how you can safeguard and really engage in data sovereignty, but at the same time, really ensure that there could be better flow in order to hit some other commitment. For example, every African country has a commitment as part of African Continental Free Trade Area. And that actually means that data will be exchanged across the continent. So how do you then really make that to really lies with data sovereignty that a lot of government will want to see? So it's about how do we then really educate government that this is the right thing, this is what you could do. So we can't assume that government knows everything, because in a way, we're also part of the government. So we need to also continue to really engage government with capacity building. I think those are the things, a few things I can mention, but let me allow others to also join the conversation.
We're going to open the floor. But there's something I got from there is the building of the capacity with the government agencies. And I have a story that I can tell now that pretty much will tell to this. 2 years ago, ECOWAS had felt that the Supplementary Act on Data Protection, on personal data protection, was not really telling to what happens in the region. And so they had had a meeting with a couple of other sectors, private sectors, and a few civil society experts. And then it was decided that ECOWAS needed to formulate or revise its supplementary act. So I think they had reached out to a couple of organizations who took over this, and it was redesigned to a new supplementary act that I think will be passed in December of this year, and it's come into law for the whole 13 or 12 ECOWAS country, depending on who is still there and who has left. But I think the most important stuff was, even after this revision, 2 months ago or a month ago in Senegal, ECOWAS still felt that we have this draft. Member states are going to sign in a couple of days, but we don't understand the content of this draft. And what has not been done before happened, where we had CSOs from every country in the ECOWAS that is active and is working on something related to data. Private sectors, which is where I met Abby from, in these countries that are working, that are running huge data between themselves, and also the government agencies from every country. And it was a 5 days of sitting down and shouting at each other. Not shouting in a bad way, but the conversations that happened in that 5 days gathering kind of made way for a whole lot of things that I think is happening now. Because when the laws were being drafted, there were issues about cross-border data flows. You know, countries were very adamant on saying, hey, we don't want data that goes because we are both in ECOWAS, but doesn't mean that Flutterwave, for example, in Nigeria, can send the data to Ghana because they have an office. They should rather come back to the regulator in Ghana and ask for approval. And so when the first day, the private sector took the time to explain the processes of how they run their businesses to the government. And then the civil society also took the time to explain how the processes they also run, which might be in terms of coalition, which might be in terms of their gatherings and the rest. And then finally, the government took some time to say, hey, you know, we have listened to this. This is very insightful. We then have an understanding to why you make some of the decisions you make. And now it's led to the ministers will be signing this document in November, and then the head of state will be signing it in December. I just want to show an example how we all in the room can also work together to make sure that we are not just telling the government that this is, you know, if you sell data is inhumane, but this data can also be your data. It can also be something very sensitive in a way that the government can understand a whole lot, to also understand why the policies either make sense or don't make sense, you know. But now I have spoken a lot, and I will throw this open. If you have awesome ideas on how you feel the trust can be built, regardless of not stunting the growth of innovation, or you have questions for the panelists or any of us, I think the room is full of a whole lot of experts, so we can all answer.
Thank you. A big thank you to our panelists. Mine has to do with what you understand as government. Because I see you talk government as that abstract things up there with institutions, policies, and laws. But government involves me and you and ordinary citizens. And my view is that what civil society should be focusing on right now and looking at the digital divide between the South and the North is start with ordinary citizens to appreciate data. What do you mean by data, especially personal data? In many of the institutions we go to, whether they're public or private, the first thing you are requested to do is to register yourself. In a book, there's a person, whether it's a security guard or someone assigned to make sure that whoever is entering this structure of government or so has to register himself. They capture your name, your national ID, your telephone number, details. But this is a book that is exposed to everybody who comes close there. You can take a picture of all those who have registered. You will not be bothered. Anyone can come and access it. So how do you make this person ordinary appreciate that this personal data is holding a person is very sensitive and can be misused, so that they can appreciate before we go to these huge bureaucrats you are going to discuss with? Because I think it's important that citizens appreciate the importance of keeping personal data secure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joshua. I just want to add to what Mr. Robert has just mentioned. I think, we talk about accountability so much in how, institutions handle data and the existing practices. But I think also one way for us to build trust, but also to speak to governments and in a way that is progressive and share lessons and best practices would also be to start with ourselves as civil society organizations, right? Holding ourselves accountable. Because, some of the practices we speak about, like, entering a bank and you're writing in a book. Come to think of it, when you sort of audit yourself even as an organization, these are things you still do, and you've not even implemented, like, the basic data protection practices in your organization, right? So a lot of the time we're doing these recommendations and we write the reports, but we've also not done self-audits to begin with ourselves. So that way you're speaking to, these big entities, private sector, on how, they're handling data, and you're speaking from a point of this is what we've done. But beyond that, I think in the spirit of also building trust in the whole ecosystem, I am aware that, there is already a framework, an M&B framework, being put together from the AU side on how we are going to audit progress, with the domestication of the AU data policy framework. It would be good to also see, and of course efforts are already there documenting use cases and investment and everything and how things are going in the ecosystem. But it would be good for civil society also to play the watchdog role as we get into, this domestication and implementation of the AU data policy framework, to document and sort of give prescriptive recommendations on a lot of things that we've been recommending over the years. For example, where I work, we've been talking about, how do countries set up data systems and policies that are rights respecting, are inclusive, which is a very key principle when you look at the AU data policy framework, and also providing, models on things that they can look at. Yesterday, Edwin from CIPESA talked about how CIPESA has drafted a policy, I think sort of a data governance policy that civil society organizations could look at. I think that's a very interesting aspect, that even ourselves, how are we handling data? And that way you could start speaking to private sector, you could start speaking to governments from a point of, this is what we've done and it seems to work. So you're already figuring out and sort of prototyping, what are these, policies, what should these policies look like? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I think maybe just to add on the issue of building trust. So I think the starting point is to raise awareness, because most of the distrust is purely because people are ignorant. They don't know what is involved, who is doing what, why are they doing it. So when you are ignorant, you don't trust anyone, even if their intentions are good. I think that applies in different principles. And that applies, my brother tried to maybe classify, like, just to show that government means everyone. But even with that wrong definition of government that he has guided us on, still that trust needs to be built. And also just raising awareness in terms of what are the systems that are in place, what are the structures, what role are they playing, and how do we fit in, whether as civil society, as media, as citizens. Because without that awareness, it becomes difficult for people to do anything, and then that breeds an environment of distrust. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, okay, so hello, my name's Elena Hickok, and I'm with the Global Network Initiative. We're a multi-stakeholder initiative working towards corporate accountability. And before G&I, I worked and led a research center in Bangalore for about 10 years. And I think in addition to trust, we as a civil society organization in the Indian context also struggled a lot with just having legitimacy as civil society to work with the government. And there's a lot of different things that need to come together for an effective relationship with the government. But one thing that we started to really lean into is to look at international coalitions, initiatives, memberships, networks to help build up our legitimacy that we could then engage with the government through and share that we are a part of. And one that I wanted to highlight, in addition to GNI, which I work at now, is I'm the co-chair for the Freedom Online Coalition's advisory network. The Freedom Online Coalition is a group of 40 governments working towards internet freedom, and it is their diplomatic arms that participate in the network. Ghana is a member. There's a couple of other members as well from the African context. And so it's a good way to be engaging with just different arms within the government, and I have found that it helps build up that trust and legitimacy when interacting. And I co-chair with Benga from Paradigm Initiative for the advisory network, and we have elections every 2 years, so if you're interested, please do reach out. What's the name of the institution? It's called the Freedom Online.
Just so that I am collating well, we have discussed about the need for the CSOs to help build internal capacity. We have shared about the need for the CSOs to help out with awareness in the community. And also, Philip talked about auditing yourself also. And I was going to add something that is a bit more government related, because then for some reason, anytime you talk to me about an issue, the first thing I think about is a policy. So I'm still going to say it regardless, would be data categorization, to help answer his question also. Means is that the government can help categorize data to what level of sensitivity it is, and to what level can a data controller or a data processor be able to, very long term, what level that can someone be able to take those data from people. So meaning is, if a data is too sensitive and doesn't need to be taken, then there's no need for it to be taken. This as an extra measure to Philip's solution of having some audit and entirely know what you're also using this data from. There was someone who, yeah. So we can maybe go and do that. Sorry.
Thank you very much. My name is Anita from the Personal Data Protection Office of Uganda. What I just wanted to say is that when you look at most data protection authorities, for example, in Africa, most of them struggle with resources and independence as well. So I would like to call upon the CSOs, if you could maybe push for the independence and then resources for these most of these regulators, that could help. Because we all know that if independence is compromised, then there will be no enforcement. Thank you.
Hi, my question is to you, Abby. I think it was very interesting to me, you're sharing, because I don't think it's a perspective we hear a lot. Your submission on balancing innovation with the legalities of data. I'm very curious. So let me, you've brought up the example of consent a lot, and how it is a burden, right? In a sense, a legal burden on the innovators, you said. And it's very interesting to me because, consent, quite simply, away from the legal structures, it implicitly speaks to, a poor relationship that, for instance, as Flutterwave, you're moving huge amounts of data that could be very much considered sensitive personal data, right? But I've always felt, and I don't know if this is accurate, and it's why I'm asking you, that from the innovators and as devs, I don't know if there is the appreciation of this is actually an ethical, standard for you guys to think about as a, and for it beyond the legal, aspects or as a legal burden, that this is something that should be thought about from the perspective that we actually have to protect people's data because it is personal data. But away from that is also the fact that as innovators as well, policy should be something that is, enabling to your work. And I know that's a big part of the entire digital transformation strategy in Africa, innovation, blah, blah, how do we support innovators? And I think it's a conversation we've been having with my colleagues that it's actually interesting that we see, especially for the SMEs, the techies who are just starting up with SMEs, failing to scale, right? We see a lot of, I think you guys are a unicorn case, right? But a lot of the startups in the space die out. It's prototypes that just do not go well. We don't see a lot of these innovations actually happening. So data governance in that sense doesn't seem to be very much supportive of this innovation aspect that we are talking about. So I don't know if the question is so much so a question, but I'm wondering how are you guys thinking about that perspective of, that we should be respective of these rights and ethics, etc. But at the same time, what would it look like for you people to be supported the most, right? From the innovator private perspective, because especially for us as Africa, because if we don't get a lot of these innovations that are being developed, growing and scaling to global innovations, then I don't think it makes a lot of sense. So I'm wondering what would support you guys look like from a policy perspective, but also embedding that on your end, the human rights ethics perspective. Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, thank you.
Can you hear me? Oh, yeah. Okay, that's very interesting. So just like you said, I find that even a lot of compliance cost is one major thing that makes startups and small organizations actually die out, right? Because you're paying for, I know now some laws put it in categories to say that, if you collect and process data of like maybe 200 data subjects as an example, you get to pay $2. If you process from like 5,000 to 10,000, you pay this particular amount. But even beyond that, there's still a number of costs that you have to bear within the organization to the regulator. Sometimes you have to be registered with the regulator. You have to get some sort of certification. I know there's a particular market, West African market, that we had to, we're supposed to be registered with them, or they mandated organizations to register with them. But before you get that registration, you have to be trained by a particular organization. And I looked at the cost you had to pay for training, and I thought to myself, how does this help, smaller organizations? And I was just wondering, how are they able to manage, right? And that's just one regulator. That's just one aspect of compliance. So compliance costs is one issue that I find with, again, something that impacts a lot of organizations and small organizations. But I think that even amidst all of that, organizations should also, that's to your initial point of consent and things like that. Organizations should be responsible in their collection of data, in their use of data. Because if you pay this much for compliance costs, just imagine what enforcement is going to be like. Again, that's another problem, especially in Africa. Fines can be, I don't want to say arbitrary, but sometimes they can be arbitrary, right? And then even when you read these enforcement decisions, it's a bit hard to even understand how the reasoning, what the reasoning was behind it, because it's not fully detailed. So the best thing is just to ensure that even at that low level of scale of the organization, they are doing the right practices. And compliance is not that difficult, especially at a particular level, because if you're a small organization, I would expect that you're not collecting so much data just yet, right? You're still scaling. And if from that point of your small scale, you are already embedding these things, it's very easy. Just be transparent about what you're doing with the information. Just be transparent about, what you're collecting, how you're using it. Embed security controls as well. Another thing why I say compliance cost is one of the reasons why startups die is, so there are ISO standards that organizations can actually implement. You can get certifications, things like ISMS, so Information Security Management System, Privacy Information Management System, Business Continuity, and things like that. These certifications are fantastic because there's no way you can get certified without applying and implementing a number of standards across your organization. But think about it from, it's not mandate, well, depending on the industry. If you're in the financial industry, the 27 27001 is mandatory. That's for information security management system, because they expect that if you're a bank or you're in finance and or you're providing financial services, you have to have that certification. So for some industries, it's mandatory. But then, even though it's not, I usually encourage that organizations have this. But again, how do startups manage this? So I think it's just from the very little things, from the organizational perspective, from the moment you are small. And because, so again, the organization I work with started out as a startup. So we're not always this big. And even from that moment, you find that you have maybe one staff wearing 2 caps or 3 caps at that point, but still make sure that whoever you're employing either has the capacity or you build capacity for them. So even when you're small, I mean, when I joined the organization, we were, I think my number was like 62 or something. And now we are like very big. So I joined the organization when it was a startup, and I know how much we were very compliance focused, and we still are. So it's not really about the size of the organization, because even as at then we're really small, and we're so particular about just make sure you comply. And this regulator engagement, I said, has started from way back. It's not, a now thing. So employ people that have capacity, or build capacity for them even from that stage. And as you grow, they are key. So I understand that when the organization is small, sometimes you may need to wear 2 hats, wear 3 hats, but there are some key roles that I think you should actually invest on. Things like your compliance, your engineers, someone that understands cybersecurity and things like that, especially when you're collecting data. So it's very important that even when you're trying to manage cost as a small organization, you are still focused on particular roles, because if things go, they're called high-risk areas within the organization. If things go bad in that area, then it's even more cost for the organization as well. So I think things like that are very important. And also in complying, I think it's also important that organizations avoid, dark practices, no matter what level you are, what level of skill. And when I say dark practices, let me see what I can use as an example. Cookies, for instance, right? People are going to land on your website, so you need to put up a cookies notice. You need to make sure that where the cookies are not necessary. So you have cookies that are that the website needs to function, right? So those ones they cannot opt out of. But when you are doing things like analytics, you're doing marketing, no matter the scale of the organization, you need to actually get people to consent and let them understand. I find it very upsetting when I land on a website and you are forcing me to accept that's cookies thing before I can do anything. It's extremely bad practice. So regardless of the size of your organization, these are little things that you do to build trust, to make sure that you don't, again, hit those compliance costs. Because the size of the organization sometimes will not really matter when the fines are actually issued by the regulator. So I think that's like what I can say. So it's, again, the size of the organization matters, but from the moment you are a small organization, you have to just factor these things in, is how I say it. Who has the mic, please? Oh.
Before I pass it on, can I ask my question? I guess it's a question to the panel, but it's also food for thought as we go about our work. I'm Amanda Manyame, and I work at Equality Now, an international human rights organization. And one of the trends that we've been seeing is, even including the international standards organization, is moving away from compliance and thinking about more safety by design. And considering that data is the bedrock of AI, and we are in an AI boom, I think it's something that maybe as tech companies or more the private sector that is collecting and making use of data, maybe some of the things that need to be thought about, or if you already are thinking about it and you are able to share, it'll be interesting to hear how have you been thinking about safety by design. So yes, policy frameworks can stifle innovation at times, but I believe we are moving away from the move fast, break things era, and we're moving more into how do we make sure, as we're collecting data, as we're designing tools, as we're at the design and use of AI and other take, it is safe from the design phase. So how do startups and other tech companies or private sector like yourselves that are bigger now, how do you ensure that part of that innovation and not being stifled before we even get policies? Because the policy, I think it will take a bit longer. How do we make sure that we are embedding safety by design principles at the design phase, at the testing phase, and even after the deployment phase? Thank you.
Respond very quickly. I can respond quickly, right? Before I... Okay. Okay, all right. So like I mentioned earlier, privacy by design is very important. And just like you said, that's the best way to look at it. You're factoring in these things before build. Sometimes you also have to check it even while it's being built, just at your quality assurance stage, that's before go live. And then you have to continuously monitor after go live. Now, maybe because in this part of the world, we've not really fully hacked AI when it comes to regulations and things like that. But I think that automation, I love automation. I absolutely love it so much because it makes life easy. But I think that sometimes it's still important to have human intervention as you use automation. So let me think of an example. So say an ATS, an applicant tracking system. Right. You have to, in your privacy by design and the controls that you then need to, your controls testing after you have rolled out that product. Because sometimes we do the whole privacy by design and forget that you need to keep going to check the controls after you have deployed. Engineering, a lot of things can go wrong with technology. Sometimes you roll something out, there's been a rollback. And that's why you have to always collaborate with your engineers and your product guys. So, in your controls testing, you also have to ensure that maybe because, again, we import some of these automated tools, some of them are not really trained to understand the environment. Or whatever data has been fed into them has trained them in a particular manner. So if you are using some level of automated decision making, you need to let your customers know that you are using a level of automated decision making, and to the extent to which you're using, again, to that rule of transparency. And in addition to that, if you make decisions fully automated decision making rather, you need to also communicate how you reach that conclusion. So sometimes you find that you maybe apply for a job and then maybe shortly after you just get some sort of automated response. It has probably just checked random things in your CV. So do you actually go to do controls testing to see that, does the portal or the applicant tracking system only reject Asians? Does it only reject Africans? Does it only reject women? And what have you fed into it, right? So what has it been trained with? So even as you're automating, automation is good, but it's still important that I think that human intervention is still important, and you still need to keep doing, those controls testing to be sure that your tools are not being discriminatory. What's that thing called now? Something bias in AI, right? They're not being discriminatory. Same happens with digital lenders. You're going to go get a loan. Are you checking that the tool is not, giving maybe some sort of higher credit management to men than women or women than men and things? So that's what your controls testing does. So even beyond privacy by design is the full cycle, is throughout the life cycle of data that you still need to keep checking these things, especially when you're using automation. And when I say the life cycle of data, is from when you collect the information to the use, to when you archive it, and to when you delete the information until you have totally erased it. So that's my take on AI. And when you use AI to actually reach a decision, you need to make sure that you're communicating why or how you have reached a decision, and let them know from the get-go that, okay, this is an automated decision process. You can put it in your notice, and depending on the type of activity, sometimes you may need a second type of pop-up so that they know that, this is what. And that's, so again, when privacy laws say that you have a right not to be subject to automated decision making, I find that thing very funny, because can I write to a company that I have applied to today to say, don't subject me to automated decision making? I can do it, but again, will they comply? That's the question. Are they going to single out my CV and decide that, they want? I've not seen that happen in operation, but again, it's a right that we have as individuals. All right.
Sorry, I don't know, maybe I can just raise a... so the idea of, privacy by design is good. However, without a very strong civil society, I don't think the incentive mechanism is also going to tilt towards break it till it's successful. Because I mean, how if I have this kind of lax, I mean, or autonomy to really take this decision, what is the incentive mechanism that I should do something that is not in my own best interest? So I think the incentives still dictate that someone would really want to really do the best in their own interest, which might not really be the best in society or really the consumer or citizens' interest. So how do you deal with this? I think strong civil society could really help in that area. For example, America is I mean, when we look at data governance and talk about data governance, we talked about model like laissez-faire in the US, the strong state one in the China, and the very private center in the EU. But look at it, and even in the US, that I mean has this very lax regulatory environment. Just this week, Amazon paid about $2.5 billion as fines, and that's like the biggest fines in the world. And this is actually under an administration that is very lax in terms of regulation. And that speaks to the role of civil society bringing those challenges to them. I mean, there's been a lot of happenings whereby even though you have the right to really say, let's break it, but sometimes when civil society, when bad press comes to you, it's also really going to be a check and balance. So if we don't really create that check and balances, I think we'll get to this process whereby abuses are inevitable. Thanks.
Maybe we take the last set of questions together and we can round up.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Penina Igaga, and I'm from Uganda. So, I am one person who believes in simplicity in whatever you are doing, okay? Now, how many people know SMEs that have compliance departments within their SME system? Exactly, not many. Your company, okay, great. But those are one in I don't know how many, okay? Now, from what I've been hearing, it calls for a multifaceted approach. We need to have multi-stakeholders coming on to work towards ensuring that even the smallest SME is aware of data governance, is aware of data protections, okay? It goes as little as us in the CSOs having projects where we go around to actually teach or even inform people about the laws. Uganda has a data protection and privacy law, and I think during the 2 years of COVID, the organization that I work with alongside, a consortium of other organizations moved around Uganda. We masked up and moved around Uganda to just teach the grassroots organizations and just inform them of the compliance need in a language that they understand. That's also another factor, because we are central. Central is maybe Kampala, capital city, where a good number of people speak English. But the people up country, can they comprehend these data protection laws in English? Okay? So you may give them documentation, you may give them flyers on, there's this law, you've simplified it in English, but they still will not comprehend. Okay? Now, because of that, they will default. The government will put out, regulations saying that you need to comply, but I can't comply because I don't know. I did not comprehend the law that you put out, and at the end of the day, I end up having to incur all the costs because I haven't complied. Now, of course, I know ignorance of the law is no defense, yes, but we still have a responsibility as a country, as a government, as the various stakeholders, CSOs, to do it for the people who ideally, even the data subjects, do they know that they have a right to take back information if they're not comfortable with how this information is being used? Teach them, let them understand this. So it calls for us just simplifying it to the smallest to make sure that people are aware of all this. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christiana, and I'm just going to take it up from the issue of ignorance and consent. And it's just going to be in the point of, Abby had said something about, some organization has as long as 24 pages of documents they need to read and sign. And we know that in this part of the world, we're a bit lazy when it comes to reading. And perhaps we could do something like simplifying, maybe CSOs would work with private organizations, to simplify what exactly is this 24-page document saying to maybe a page document so that people can, understand and, properly give consent. Because at times you're trying to, maybe apply for something, or you're trying to open a bank account, and, you'd be like, I'm not reading this, I'm just going to sign and, just assume, I understand everything that is being said. That's the first point. And my second point is going to be that when it comes to compliance, for example, I'm from Nigeria, and when it comes to compliance, you have a lot of regulations or laws that you need to comply with. So there are a lot, at times, you can be complying with regulations of about 15, and there are different organizations. So perhaps we could, CSOs, I know Thomas Reuters Foundation is doing something like this for CSOs in Africa, where they help them to, to comply with, the relevant laws. If we could have something like this for, small businesses in the region to help them, understand, some of these laws and how best to go about it. Thank you.
I have a couple of comments. So I'm doing research in data governance, and my focus in the financial services sector, because it's a space I've been. And maybe to answer Bobina's question on the consent aspect. So the Kenyan data protection law says a person can withdraw consent, and when they withdraw, it should not affect the service provider's ability to provide service. So now put it in the financial sector aspect is you've withdrawn consent. This person has to comply with AML CFT regulations. They have to comply with KRA. They have to comply with a few other regulators when it comes to reporting and being able to, if they're and CBK, if they're asked for your information, they need to be able to provide it. So you've withdrawn consent, they are not supposed to deny you service. So now, how is this private provider supposed to balance those different requirements from the different regulators? So what is happening, and also to add to what the lady from Uganda Data Protection Office is, you'll find a lot of providers are focusing on their sector regulator, because this person has the ability to withdraw their license. The DPA, they do not have. And them, they rely on people complaining to be able to pick up an issue. And without a complaint, they can't act, you get. So there's that gap in terms of how can all these regulators work together. We have provider, one of the person I interviewed was like, they spend at most 50% of their time having to deal with compliance issue instead of working on innovating products, because they have multiple regulators they have to comply with. The CBK regulation says they need to keep data for 7 years. KRA comes 10 years after that, they need the data. How is this person supposed to comply? So I think let's start first, especially from the regulator private sector aspect. Can we first address all these different requirements from the different regulators so that we have one bill that is actually addressing the human rights aspect, and also looking at from a business standpoint? Let's balance the different requirements. That will help address a lot of the trust issues that are there, because again, a service provider comes and asks for extra data, you're like, why do you need additional information? And this is not for their own use, it's just the fact that there's requirements from government for more information. So that will actually be able to address the trust, and it will limit the fact that you find one provider is asking for X, the other provider is asking for Y. Like there's that disparity in terms of the data. So it will standardize the requirements. In terms of, for example, I think Estonia has done a very good job in addressing trust in the data system with what they have been able to build. So they have like one single source of data provision access. And how they've created it is citizens are able to monitor every single request that is done on their data, and they actually get a notification to consent or not. So it builds both the access part of it, whereby we're working with one single source of data access, and also the citizen is able to monitor who's doing what with my data and who's, including government entities, because that's something that has come up a lot, whereby a lot of the people are complaining government is not regulating itself. So it's like these regulations are for private sector and government is not applying the same. So when it comes to building trust, I think let's look or learn from what Estonia has done and see if we can actually apply on it, because then they've been able to balance all these different interests in the space, especially when it comes to data. On the issue of automated processes, I think the EU AI Act actually addresses that in terms of now putting that process as a higher risk. And there's even a case in Australia that was determined on the same, whereby a public institution had an automated process, and it actually was decided that it was biased and they need to address it. So it's something that I think we can borrow as Africa and see how they're going to implement it.
Good. I think it's good afternoon. My name is Wanetaba, and I'm the judge of High Court based in Malawi. I think 3 issues I wanted to raise quickly. I think when you look at data governance, the issue is, from a perspective of some of us who are on the other side, is the power imbalance. The fact remains, there's a major big power on your side, as opposed to the people that are data subjects. And that's why you have the heavy compliance. If you look at history shows that the person with the power is the person with money, and you're using that data for something. So the power balance issue has to be, at some level, minimized. And that can only come through compliance and regulation. We cannot run away from that because of that power imbalance. That power imbalance is even worse in an African context, because a lot of your data subjects are illiterate. So even when you put it in a single page, a simplified form, the concept of them understanding what you're actually asking of them is quite critical. So that very element requires that the responsibility on the person, on you wanting the data, is heightened because of the level of the power imbalances. And lastly, I think from the point of view of government not complying, the laws are not subjective to be compliance only on one side. It's across the board. The fact nobody makes government accountable is not that the law is subjective. The law makes everyone accountable who keeps data, whether it's the judiciary keeping data. I have to be able to protect people's rights, even though that information might be public to some degree, but there is still compliance that we, even in government, must ensure when it comes to data. Thank you.
Sorry, maybe one comment to Anita about the independence, and that's something that we face every day. So, as you might know, Malabo Convention calls for the establishment of independent data protection authorities. The AUDPF calls for the strengthening of data protection authorities. So, within the, if you look at a continental approach, there has been precedence on how these authorities should be set up. And the question about the government not being compliant with these laws, I think is a scenario where then you question why exactly a data protection authority is not independent. There's some certain benefit to it. My other proposition about that is the finances. Without the money, you can't enforce. Without the money, you can't have capacity. Without the money, you cannot have reach. You cannot create the platform for data subjects to report, and seek redress where the rights have been infringed. Lastly, I know we talk about building trust, but on a regional level, a lot of the work is happening at REX. At the REX level, Joshua touched on the review of the supplementary law in ECOWAS. In SADC, there is a development, a legal development happening there, which for members of SADC, I think it would be important to look at. And even at the EAC, 2 key developments. One being the development of a regional data governance policy framework, which should be adopted very soon, and then conversations around developing a legal framework on data protection and privacy for ESC as well. But the bigger picture is that, and I would like for us to also think about it as we depart from this room, is that Africa is moving towards being sustainable for itself, right? So there's a question about free movement of people, free movement of goods and services, and that's the bigger picture. So yes, I understand that there's a question about human rights and personal data protection requirements to be observed, but that is a clear facet of one of the things that need to be addressed. So data governance in essence would cover that. And at a regional level, there are a lot of efforts that are being made. What I'd highly encourage civil society organizations, academia, research, the judiciary, is to take note of these developments and where possible to contribute, right? So that's the only way we can achieve a situation where there's trust in society when these regional laws track down. So what happens is that we have the AU DPF, we have the DTS, we have the AI strategy for AU, and all these are continental policies that then trickle down to regional policies, and then they trickle down to member state level, and that's how we have harmonization. But the idea is that even when it's at that high stage, civil society, governments, academia, whoever is able to put out their voice, they should put out their voice. Conversations on how to do it we can have during lunch, but the idea is there are platforms for that, there are occasions for that, and it's us as the professionals, as the practitioners in this space, to look out for those opportunities and to speak and to contribute and to critique and build a better product for us with a bigger picture in mind. Thank you.
All right. Joshua has given me 1 minute. So to round this off, and I agree with my sister over there, organizations need to be responsible. I mean, you need to put yourself in the shoes of the data subjects, right, when you're doing all of these things and you're processing. But to round off, I would say that collaboration is key amongst all players, from civil societies, because again, because I work in the private sector, there are some things that I may not be able to, some conversations I may not be able to have with a regulator, right, because I know that I represent an organization. So those are things that civil societies can also help us to drive, that collaboration as well with regulators, with the governments, and I mean, just general collaboration is what I'm going to say. I think that's very important to get us to where we need to be as a continent. 1 minute, right?
Thank you. So for me, I think I would like to conclude on the power imbalances that was raised in the in terms of, I mean, and there are multiple layers to the imbalances. I mean, you look at the platform firms, they are very powerful. I remember when Twitter, when there was problem with Twitter in India, the whole, I mean, Jack then has to travel to India. When the same thing happened in Nigeria, the biggest country in Africa, they didn't actually budge. They stick their ground until, I mean, governments have to just reopen. So it just shows you that there's power imbalances. And so at the very international level, I think to address that imbalances, the regional approach to data governance is critical, which means Africa needs to really see ourselves as a single market and really see how we can really leverage that to really balance the conversation there. But also when we go to our different countries, there are also imbalances between firms, I mean, big firms, and also citizens. I mean, citizens that you expect to read 25 pages. And I think even if you can read English, I don't think you will sit down to read 25 pages of instruction. Nobody reads that. And I think, again, to really talk about the imbalance at the national level, the civil society can actually do that. We can have civil society that maybe their role is even looking at that, checking it, and if there is some kind of manipulation by firms, these are kind of entry point for legal actions, or for them to really also spotlights evil intentions among firms. So I think there are entry points for us to actually balance the power, and I think that's what we need to be thinking about. Yeah.
If there's anything we should go home with, I would say is let's go home with the concept of we should do our own internal audit to figure out where we also as individuals are missing it. We should try to help with awareness. We should try to help to build the capacity of both the government and also ourselves and also externally and the citizens. Thank you so much. It's been quite well working with you all or speaking with you all or having the panel with you all. Thanks for to the audience also. It's quite interesting to hear your options. I would say that for us, as GIZ, we have gotten, I've written as much as I can. And if there's anything I try to promise people when I speak to them is that as much as we could, we will try to speak to the relevant parties bilaterally on these conversations and see how we can make some change. On the map, on the board, we have a map of what we are doing on the continent, and I really wanted to show you all before we leave is the African Union has been really helping in the domestication of the DPF in terms of harmonization. And pretty much as of today, the African Union is currently doing this in 35 countries, which I think says a lot. And what is being done, according to what Mary was asking, is harmonization of these policies across the continent. And we believe